Welcome to the You're Not Crazy podcast, hosted by Jessica Knight, a certified life coach who specializes in healing from narcissistic and emotional abuse. This podcast is intended to help you identify manipulative and abusive behavior, set boundaries with yourself and others, and heal the relationship with yourself so you can learn to love in a healthy way. You can connect with Jessica and find additional resources, content, and coaching at emotionalabusecoach.com.
Hello, and thank you for being here. I'm going to go through some of the fine print before we get started. You can find me at emotionalabusecoach.com. I offer one-on-one coaching, courses that are self-study, validation calls, which are one-off calls, and consistent coaching for people that are really trying to kind of break the cycle of abuse and to understand how to do that with support and guidance along the way. You can find me on Substack, where I write a lot about various topics, including high conflict divorce. If you search Jessica Knight Coaching, you will find it, and all of these links are below in the show notes. If you are going through high conflict divorce and that's what brought you here and you need support, you can go to high-conflictdivorcecoaching.com. Today I want to talk about a topic that I think I talk about probably every day of my life. I coach almost every day, honestly. And so this comes up often because I often think that we fall into a specific cycle of abuse with our abuser. And doesn't mean that there's not multiple specific cycles depending on what you're going through. I think that there is a specific or like a largely specific cycle that you probably are likely in the majority of the time. That doesn't mean, again, that there's not more than one. And if you don't know what the cycle of abuse is, I have other episodes about that. I also will tag those in the show notes so you can go click on them quickly. But essentially, the cycle of abuse isn't a pattern. It's basically a trap that keeps victims locked in an emotional whirlwind of confusion, hope, and terror. And we all have a version of it. And our cycle that we get stuck in with our partner is, we always hope that they're going to change, but the same painful dynamic repeats over and over again. And if you haven't listened to my Cycle of Abuse podcast or seen any of my resources, I'm going to explain the cycle of abuse quickly. If you Google this will come up too. So if you literally Google it and then you type on Google Images, the cycle of abuse comes up. There's a few different versions of it. I'm going to go through the most common one. There's different words around it, but just trust me on this one. They all say the same thing in different ways. The cycle of abuse has 4 stages. Most generally, there's 4 of them that we go through, and they can kind of start and end at any point. It doesn't go 1, 2, 3, 4. It can start at a certain thing and go the other way. Cycle of abuse is always at play in an emotionally abusive relationship. You can be in the cycle of abuse, and it can last a day, it can last an hour, it can last a week, it can last a month, but the cycle is always repeating itself. That's why it's called a cycle. We don't leave the cycle. We just get to the calm stage, which I'll explain. And so in the cycle of abuse, it starts with actually tensions building. So tensions increase. There might be breakdowns around communication. There could be passive aggression. There could be silent treatment. The victim usually becomes fearful and is trying to placate the abuser in some way. If you are somebody who fawns, which is the trauma response of just basically appeasing them, this might be, a bit of a comfort zone for you, right? So tensions are building and you're trying to navigate around it. I remember when I was in an abusive relationship, actually the last relationship I was in, I would recognize that tensions were building and that I would really try and detach because I did not want to be in the cycle. And I was like, I'm not doing this. I see what's happening and I'm not doing it. And he would react to that detachment, but he wouldn't change his behavior. That was kind of creating chaos. So it was like a pressure cooker of hell. But usually what this looks like is there's tiny arguments, like I said, silent treatment, passive aggression, a lot of little things building up where you feel like the tension's rising and something is going to pop and there's going to be an incident. And then is the incident. That's the second stage, the abusive incident. This is usually verbal, emotional, or physical abuse. There's anger, outburst, blaming, intimidation. Like if you're in a relationship where they get into big fights or screaming matches, this would be the time where that happens. It is the explosive moment. And then there's reconciliation. And so you get to this point and like after there's a big incident, and like I just want to say this, that the tension building phase can go on like forever. You can feel like tension, like something has to freaking pop, and then it doesn't pop. And so once we get to reconciliation, we've actually been craving that for a long time at this point, probably since we started realizing that this was happening. And so then that brings us to when they apologize or you apologize, the abuser gives excuses. You may be blamed, but you apologize and then it's fine. You might deny it. They might deny it. They might say it wasn't as bad as you are claiming. And a lot of times some reconciling is just literally like not engaging. And it's scary because I remember my ex used to ask me a logistical question. Like we'd get into something and be like, I'm no longer responding. I'm taking a step back. And then he would, an hour later, it'd be like, do you know where my Chase card is? And I'd be like, in your wallet. But like, he would say things like that to like engage me and then when that didn't work, he would up the ante with something where like, I would respond because it had to do with like his son, or something like that, where like, I'm not going to just ignore. And then we get to the calm, where after there is reconciliation in whatever form it looks like, the incident is forgotten, swept under the rug, no abuse happened, and you return to the best version of the honeymoon phase that you can be in, which is likely just a lesser version of hell that you're experiencing. And it feels awful. Calm never feels like calm. Calm is like the closest thing to calm that you're going to get, but it's not actually calm. It's calm that's not calm. That's a cycle of abuse, because before you know it, tensions rise again. And that's why I say it continues to go around the cycle, is because it's never actually calm. It's calm for a moment. I was telling this story to a client the other day that I had a partner that like literally couldn't go 2 weeks in calm. Like his system was so dysregulated that I really believe that like 2 weeks in calm, he would start to kind of like, he needed that tension to be building again. Like he needed air to breathe. He didn't know it. He wouldn't admit it. If I told him right now, if he listened to this right now, he wouldn't even think I'm talking about him. Like that's literally the truth, because he was so in denial of the cycle. But I, being the cycle that I am, I tracked it. I was like, because I had a sense just based on like where things were going. I was like, he can't go 2 weeks being calm. Like we can't even try a new way of communicating for 2 weeks before he implodes. And that it was like to the point, and I remember thinking it was so interesting because in that dynamic is when, and I've always thought that we all have like a specific cycle in our relationship that our relationship seems to work with in some, way, which is of course scary. It's like our relationship has learned to survive the cycle of abuse all the time. But he was addicted to reconciliation. And that means that he always needed there to be an incident, which means tensions always needed to be rising, which meant that the calm felt chaotic. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But what I want to do for the rest of this episode is I want to share some examples about like what this has looked like, because I do think it would be helpful. And I want to give you a resource on what I've come up with on how you can begin to look at your specific cycle of abuse. And so I'm going to go through an example of a former client's example, actually, of what the cycle of abuse looked like for her. And so it started with tensions rising, and it was basically psychological warfare. The abuser in this case wasn't just building tension around anger or resentment. There's a lot of psychological tactics, and he almost like would employ any of them that he needed. It was like sadness if he needed to play the victim role. It was anger if he needed to play say sadness wasn't working or she wasn't responsive, then it would be anger. And then if that didn't work, then it turned into like, woe is me. And he really oscillated between the three. It was actually really interesting because it really felt like when a toddler doesn't get their needs met, that they like will do whatever they need to do to get it. That's what this felt like. And it meant like no matter what she does, they'll always feel like they are failing to keep the peace. And that was intentional. And that's what like together actually we recognized. And then we realized then like, okay, so if there's such an assortment of reactions, what is causing the emotional outburst? And it wasn't on these big moments. Like it wasn't when they missed a flight. It wasn't when, I don't know, something big broke at the house or something like that. It wasn't during like a stressful family event. It was over like really trivial things, like having issues with internet, or like things that like really were like almost like nobody could control. But this person felt like they were like they had to have control. And then it would always be blamed on the other person of like, you didn't do this, and she like at the beginning when we started working together, she couldn't really make sense of this. And she almost didn't even articulate it very well at the beginning because I think it was so confusing. It was over the course of explaining some stories. And I think it was me who sort of said, it seems that when you like these little moments, he like can't survive. Like, but like you're on a hike, you get lost and he like so easily can figure this out and like is calm. He's fine in like those chaotic moments. He is like really awful in day to day, but day to day is what they were living. Like they weren't hiking every week. You know what I mean? Like it was like the internet's not working or I use that example. I think I just said it twice. And the reason is because that would happen all the time just based on where they lived. Or it would be like, you didn't put enough gas in the car. You didn't get the right groceries. Why did you buy this? It would be like silly things. But that's what he would latch on to. And like, it really was just another way of control. And it almost felt like he would test how far he could push, how completely he could dominate that environment. And it would happen in every setting. Like there wasn't a setting that this didn't happen. There wasn't an external trigger all the time. It was like, he's the trigger. He's the trigger walking around, attaching to triggers. And then the reconciliation was super interesting because it was always in a text message. She always knew when it was going to come. And it always felt like the abuser knew exactly when to send it, just after she started to really take a breath. So of course, she felt awful. We would talk about it. We would have strategy around it. We could predict it, right? We could predict that she was not going to feel the best, but she was going to try and keep the boundary. And it was almost like the second that she started to actually like downregulate, feel better, that he texted. And things never fully improved, but it's like she was curious enough for a while to see what would happen if she responded. And so that continued for a little while. And she did feel better because she actually was experiencing some of like the withdrawal symptoms from this relationship. But she didn't feel better because she kept putting herself into it. And eventually it started to feel really bad because as time went on, and as she was moving through the cycle, she was feeling like almost even physically sick every single time she had to go. She went through it to the point that she realized like, now that I'm like regulating myself and I'm far enough removed from like the day to day of this cycle, it still is making me sick that like he does not recognize how often it comes up. I think that the last straw for her and for him, I mean, there was like 1,000 last straws, but it was about groceries. You didn't buy the thing that I said. And she was like, go get it then. Go like, honestly, like, go get it yourself. And I mean, she just was like, she was done. and he reacted extremely strongly about how, and he like connected the groceries to like her not actually caring about him, and by this point she's connecting like his abuse to him not caring about her. And it's not about the groceries, it's about the treatment. And so I think that was the last of the last straw where like she didn't accept the apology, essentially. She didn't accept the reconciliation because the reconciliation is the hook back in. It's the way that they keep that hook in place. And you never really actually feel better because things don't improve. They just move on to the calm phase, which feels more like cognitive dissonance, honestly, where you believe two things at the same time. You're like, okay, I know it's calm. Things are calm. I'm calm. It's not calm. It's just the best that it can get. And one of the things that I remember talking to her about was like how the calm didn't actually feel calm. And that was super interesting for her to realize that like it just feels weird. It just feels weird. And so I mentioned before that I was going to talk a little bit about another cycle of abuse where basically like, and this is kind of what happened to me, where I noticed that my ex was addicted to reconciliation, and the pattern wasn't random. It wasn't as like random as this other clients. This was more of a system, and he would try to deny it to gaslight me, but I couldn't unsee it. And it always happened again and again. And the only way that I knew I could win was by not engaging. And so he seemed to be addicted to a specific part of the reconciling. It's like he needed the high of making up or the emotional rush of dragging me through hell and then pulling me back in. And the reconciling wasn't about healing. It was actually about power and control. It was about him regaining control. And the only way to get out of it was to step out of it, like to leave. But the cycle in my case was never about creating stability. It followed the same cycle: calm, tension, incident, reconciliation. But most people, in most cases, it's the explosive incident that is the thing that pulls them out of it. For me, in this case, was the reconciling, because that's what I noticed he craved the most. And it was really awful because he would even push me to reconcile when I was still processing what happened. I'd be processing what happened in the relationship and he'd be pulling me in to reconcile. And I would be like, I'd want to throw up, honestly. Like, and yes, if you're wondering if I mean like have sex, yes, he wanted to also have sex at the end of like a super abusive incident, and I would want to throw up instead. Or he was like, why don't you want to cuddle with me? And it's like, because I just spent 6 hours fucking hating my existence. That's why I don't want to cuddle with you. Like, or like, can you let me breathe for 6 seconds before my life goes back to your needs again? Like, I just was like done with this. And when we were in calm, I think for me, it was like a time, at least in the beginning, when I could finally like take a breath. He would be affectionate. He'd make plans. He would like follow through. Actions and words would align. He would pretend he was the perfect partner. I would let my guard down a little bit. I would believe that like, okay, maybe we can make it past 2 weeks this time. But then I had to realize that calm actually was boring for him. And that's why we would go back to chaos. He was not capable of sustaining peace. He didn't want calm. He didn't know how to function in a healthy relationship. And so the moment things got too stable, he would start stirring the pot. And that led to the tension building, the setup for conflict. He would pick apart small things, turning them into big issues. He would withdraw just enough to make me wonder if I did something wrong, push boundaries, usually very small at first, just to see how much he can get away with or how much would I say yes to. And then he would assume my emotions, and this drove me crazy, saying things like, I can tell you're mad, even when I wasn't. I remember being like, I'm tired. Why are you tired? Because it's 7 a.m. Like, that's like, because I'm tired. I'd find myself walking on eggshells, always prepared for the storm that was coming. And it's almost like he wanted me anxious and uncertain. I remember there was this one time I was driving and he texted me like 7 times, and so like it's on Bluetooth. So I'm getting like the little dings, and then I get to the stoplight. I see the last text or something was like, what time will you be back? I didn't look at the other 7, and I like wrote like the number 8 and sent it. I got reamed out that day for not responding to the I love you that he said before I responded to anything else that I didn't read because I was driving, which he knew because he knew I was driving back from someplace. And not responding to the one thing. What I did actually do was respond to the one thing he actually needed to know, which is the time I'd be back because we had a plan. We never went out on the plan because he was too mad that I didn't respond to the I love you that he sent me when I was driving on the highway. It was crazy, but that was common, normal, frustrating, and maddening because he always made it about how I wasn't meeting his needs, which always led to the incident, which would be a blow up, meltdown, or an emotional punishment. And this part never happened randomly. It almost felt like he planned it. He would turn exhaustion into a crisis. When I was drained or tired, he would use it as an opportunity to escalate a small issue into something massive and then blame me for not engaging. And so I'd be like, because I would disengage because I still had healthy boundaries around some of this stuff. I mean, he was pushing all of them, but I was like, no, I'm not doing this. But it would be like, all of a sudden, everything I did was out of line or that I didn't care. And I'm like, you're right. In this moment, I don't care because I don't understand how this escalated into this problem. Like, I tell this story sometimes. One time, my daughter wanted to do something and I asked him if he had stick glue, but I didn't know he was mad at me for not inviting him to a birthday party that like my kid just had gotten invited to. And I was like, all of this is psychotic. And I thought it was a joke. It wasn't a joke. This was him escalating. And I just was like, all right, I got to step back. He would have these giant meltdowns at times that would force me into caretaker mode, which was different than the exhaustion into crisis. But it's like if something upset him, he wouldn't express it. He would unravel completely. Like the emotions became my responsibility. And then when I didn't caretake it, he'd make them bigger and bigger and bigger. And then I had to manage and soothe, beg him to calm down, even when I was hurt and exhausted. Most time I was hurt and exhausted. And nobody deserves that level of care from me other than my daughter. And he would try and destabilize me before important moments, like before I had to travel or do something that was important to me, he'd make sure I was emotionally wrecked. Would that cause me to set even more boundaries? One of the things that he didn't like. And so he wanted to ensure that like my memory or my last memory was guilt and that I was always on this, like I had to like catch up and make things right. And it made me feel sick. Every single time, it always felt like there was one goal to break me down so that he could then have that moment of reconciling. And so a lot of times it was through his apologies, which made me sick too. It's like, don't hurt me and then apologize just so that you can have that moment of us coming together and like feeling good about it. Like, don't do this shit in the first place. That was my point all the time, is like all of this is avoidable. And if it's avoidable and if you can just stop your role in the cycle is going to change. Things will be different, right? I won't be pulling back as much because I won't be as exhausted in this relationship. You won't feel as dismissed because if you're not having these large emotional breakdowns, then we're fine. But he wanted to push me into reactivity so he could flip the script and then blame me for it. Because then he got what he wanted. And this was the addiction to making up. And this is where I feel like this cycle was different than most abusers. He wasn't repeating the cycle of abuse to maintain like this like version of power. He was chasing the high of fixing it and feeling like he was like the knight in shining armor that came through to rescue me from like literally himself. The worse the fight, the bigger emotional payoff when I forgave him. Reconciliation felt like a drug to him. And when I didn't give it, when I like took space, he would lose it. It was intense, intoxicating, and addictive for him. He erased the past after every fight, pretending like nothing happened, which kept me emotionally off balance because I'd be like, what the hell? Are you on Mars? Like, how are you thinking that I'm going to snuggle you right now after this shit? I'm going to go like lock myself in a room with like my weighted blanket and breathe for 20 minutes or 20 days. And like, he would flip from cruel to loving so fast that like I didn't believe that the good version of him was the real one. And every time I forgave him, he learned something that I felt was really dangerous, that he could hurt me and I'd be so exhausted at the end to even want to talk about it, because that became the pattern, which meant the next fight would be worse and the next blowout how to cut deeper, because without the lows, for him, there was no high. And being addicted to reconciliation gave him control. It validated him. It proved that I still wanted him no matter what. And for me, it was that I was still living the cycle of abuse. It was dangerous because to him, this chaos was passion. It was working through things. It meant that I cared. It felt like he needed to break me so I would keep proving my love. But like love doesn't require constant repair. It's not about destruction all the time. And what he wanted wasn't love. It was power and control. And I remember one day really sitting down and mapping this out and realizing like, yeah, this is crazy and I don't want to do this. And this may look different than the cycle of abuse as I see it, but it's certainly the cycle. And so I want to explain how you can look at the cycle, because once you can actually see the cycle laid out, it becomes much harder to stay trapped in it. Clarity is the enemy of manipulation. They don't want you to have clarity. And I'm going to guide you to map your specific cycle of abuse. And if you need this in a written form, I'm going to put a link in the show notes so you can get it. We're going to walk through the pattern, triggers, and emotional responses, not just the major explosions. But I want to help you map out the cycle. Because abusers don't control through the obvious blow-ups. They control through tension, guilt, and self-doubt. And then the carefully timed relief that they provide. So first, I want you to think about identifying the phases of the cycle. Write out the repeating patterns in the relationship. You have to look for the 4 key phases. Tension building. What signs tell you things are getting bad again? How does the abuser act in this stage? What emotions do you feel at this time? Do you find yourself walking on eggshells, trying to fix things before they explode? And then the incident, the blow up. What triggered the explosion? Not just the surface reason, but what's really happening. Usually it's around a need for control in one way or another. How do they behave? Yelling, silent treatment, emotional outbursts, physical violence, throwing things. And then how do you react? Do you freeze? Try and remember what happens. Do you try and reason with them? Do you logic your way out of it? Get dismissive, shut it down? And then what happens? What happens in reconciliation and like this idea of false peace? How does the abuser make up for it? Do they love bomb, apologies, blame shift? Do they make you feel like it's your fault so that you reach out to them? How do you feel when it happens? Do you feel relief, hope? Do you convince yourself things might change? Does the abuser make you feel responsible for fixing things, or that you have to own your side of the story when you really look at it, you don't even feel like there was one? You just feel like you were sort of thrown into it? And then the calm. Is there a honeymoon period? Do they act better for a while? Do you feel like you can breathe? How long does this look before tension starts to come back? Like I said, I'm going to have all those questions on a link below. So go ahead, click on it if you want to be able to read those through. But because this is important, I want to also touch on emotional hooks. I want you to understand what hooks you into staying in the cycle. When do you feel the most relief? Is it in the high? Sometimes we feel relief in the calm because it's not abusive overtly at that moment. But sometimes it's in other places. So when do you feel that? What emotions make you stay? Fear, guilt, hope? Do you dread the explosions but feel relief when they happen? It's usually a key trauma bond sign, because at least after the explosion, there's a break. Do you feel grateful when they're nice, even though they cause pain? And mapping this out shows that the relationship isn't chaotic, but it's predictable And if it's predictable, it's engineered. I would always encourage you too to track some patterns over time. Write down specific incidents. What always comes before an explosion? Does the abuser pick fights before big events or vacations? Do they always accuse you of something before they lash out? Are they nicer when they sense you pulling away? The patterns will expose the intention behind the behavior. And now map out your trauma responses. Do you fawn, try and appease them, freeze, become numb, disassociate, fight, argue back, which they use against you, or do you flee, emotionally withdraw, but stay physical present? These are survival strategies, and once you recognize them, you can really start to make a bit more conscious choices. And then it kind of goes back to like, I am never going to push you to do anything before you're ready. My clients know that. If like you're a client listening, that you also like, I feel like every single one of them would be like, no, absolutely. Like there's very rare times where I'm like, no, this isn't okay. This is about helping you see the cycle and see that it doesn't just go away. And the longer you stay, the harder it becomes because you get more stuck, but you understanding the cycle and understanding where you are in the cycle is the first step, big step to begin to move yourself out of it. Because when you notice this happening, it becomes like, honestly, very frustrating because you're like, oh my God, like this is always happening. Mapping out the cycle of abuse and your specific cycle of abuse in your relationship isn't just about seeing it. It's about exposing the mechanics behind it. Once you realize that the behavior isn't random or emotional, but calculated and predictable, you can stop personalizing it. Then it becomes not about something that you're doing. It's like, even if you remove yourself from it and like act differently, it still happens in a very predictable way. Because it's not about you not being good enough. It's not about your behavior. The abuser needs control, and that's not going to change. And once they see that, real change happens because the only way to win is to stop playing it. And the important point of all of this, I think, is that they don't keep you trapped with just violence, right? That's not what the cycle of abuse is about. It's not just a whole thing of violence over and over again. Then we would just be living in fear and we'd see it. But they're keeping you trapped in false hope. Every cycle ends with the illusion that this time it will be different. And that's why people stay. So when you map this out and identify abuse, the goal is to really begin to cut through the illusion and give your brain or the trauma bond some feedback of what's actually going on. Because once you begin to shatter the illusion that like it will change, you can begin to say, even to yourself, I can't stop this cycle. I just have to break it. I have to move myself out of it. Like the cycle gets interrupted when you start to change because you're not going to be responding anymore. You're going to be creating a brand new cycle. That's a very loaded thing to do. It comes with boundaries. It comes with all sorts of things. But like the goal really is that you will begin to create a life that feels like yours. I know this was a longer episode. I hope you're still with me. I really hope that this was helpful. I hope that this is a tool that you can take and that you can use and that it gives you the validation that you need and it starts you on a journey of healing. And if you want to take that journey further, if you need support, you can always reach out to me for a validation call or for continued coaching. I do both, and the validation call isn't like a sales pitch to get you, to work with me. It's a validation call. I'm there to help you. And that's how I treat it. And if you want one-on-one coaching consistently, I really take the time to understand what you're going through and to begin to help you get to the other side. If you need support, go to emotionalabusecoach.com. I write a lot about this topic and various topics related on Substack, which if you search Jessica Knight Coaching, you will find me. And if you need any support, you can email me, jessica@nightcoaching.com, or follow me on Instagram. I look forward, to hopefully talking to some of you soon. And like I said, if you need a printout of this, go to the show notes. It is there. It will guide you through the questions. I hope it helps. It is free. It's literally just a link. If you are stuck, begin taking some small steps to help yourself get clarity, even if it's scary, especially when it's scary. Thank you so much for being here and for listening.